Hi everyone, this is Hans. I'm just going to go through a couple of things. First, I wanted to look at this week's activities. There are the two readings, or two types of readings. We have the book, we have chapter 11 in the book, and then two articles. There's an article by Kirchner and Sweller and Clark where they basically say, here are the problems with constructivism. And then there is a response by these folks, Mello, Silver, Duncan, and Chin, who dispute that and say, actually, you're lumping in a bunch of different constructivist things here. Let's talk about PBL and IL and see how those are actually research proven. Like, we have some data to back those up. So, interesting readings there. Next, there are two discussions. If you go to the discussions and then go down to our friends, constructivism. So I just modified these. It looked like it was a little confusing. So for part one, you can pick one of these aspects of constructivism and then talk about it and give an example and then talk about why it's relevant. And then in the so those would be individual people. You just choose which one you want to talk about. And then the whole class is going to talk about constructivism, specifically about objectives. That's one of the issues with constructivism, or one of the criticisms is, what are the objectives? How do you know what you're aiming for? So what does that look like? So that's kind of what this week looks like. Those are the only assignments. You could start working on your next case and on that paper, but those are the only ones for this week. Not that that isn't pretty intense. In terms of adding in some notes or adding in some things to think about for this week, I found a good video that Dr. Ertmer worked on where they talk about problem-based learning. It's a pretty brief video. And then I wanted to share briefly about alien rescue. Now, to preface this, most of you, when I look through and just finish grading your discussions, have a really good sense of situated cognition and social learning and all of those things. Real life application, those are constructivist theories. So this chapter should not be that complicated because you've already done it. You've already learned a lot of this stuff. It's really just formalizing with those principles. So as we talk about this, so the alien rescue is a tool. Oh, let me close that. Let me close out my email there so you don't see pop-ups. The alien rescue is a program that is a problem-based learning program. So let me just show you an example. We used this in a class that I taught for at Purdue several years ago, and I had a TA that worked on it and implemented it, and it was kind of our version of PBL. Well, one version of PBL. So what it is it's this simulation. You go into this area, you're out in space, and it turns out that you have some aliens that you need to place. You need to put them into the right planet or into the right area. And if you don't, they'll die because their bodies are made up of different things. And so we have, for example, this guy, the Iolani. It talks about what their description is, but then you can find out what there's some different ones. You can find out like what they need to breathe, where they need to live. And then you match that with the atmospheres as you learn about the different planets and figure out, okay, well, this person fits in this atmosphere, this person would fit in this atmosphere, so what planets would you put them into? So this does several things. One is it helps you with astronomy. Another is it forces you, the way that this information is shared is not clear. This is given and they say go ahead and place them, and then you're kind of on your own. You have to go around and look at all of these different pieces of data. There's no quick solution. It takes a little bit of time to dig in. There is some information where there are some calculations and stuff that you can do. This is actually more advanced than the version that I used when I was there. And then the notes thing is great. We didn't have that, I don't think, when we used it. It must have been a demo that we used, where they can take notes on which planet has which things and then go back. and use that to match them. There are some interesting things that are added too, where you have some money and you can do probes, and so you have to go against how much money you have versus what data you can gather and try and be efficient about it, because you can't just gather all the data all the time. So there's multiple constraints. And so this is an example of constructivism. This is an example, well, of including problem-based learning. Problem-based learning is one example of constructivism. And it's a really interesting example. It's a simulation with a complex problem with multiple data points, and there is some scaffolding, and it really depends on what kind of scaffolding. When you look at the website, they do talk about, the main thing is they say, hey, come and use it. But if you look at some other data on it, it says you should use it with some structure. You should plan it out and think about how you're going to use it, and give some scaffolding. So it really depends on, the approach really depends on the age group, it depends on what they know, how ready they are for it. So we were using it with college students. We just kind of threw them in and had them work on it. So kind of interesting stuff. So take a look at that, and Alien Rescue is kind of an example. The last thing I'll say, and this is related to Alien Rescue right here, is one of the things that I found. So I did a whole semester of constructivism, and it was for a dissertation for a colleague, and we were going to change the class that I was teaching. It was a one-credit class on how to integrate technology into teaching, and we allowed her to use the whole class as a constructivist experience. So the whole class was taught in a constructivist way. So we had a key problem, which was, I think they had to come up with a lesson plan. They had an environment where they needed to create a lesson plan that was in a constructivist approach to doing the lessons, teaching the content. They worked as groups, but it was extremely frustrating for them initially. It was a 16-week course, and I would say for the first 8 weeks, they were just extremely frustrated. They would ask a question, and my answer would always be, well, what do you think? Or where could you go to find that answer? And they just got so sick of hearing that. The other thing about this approach is that after they did eventually warm to it, and they did get some deep learning, I think, from it. But the other aspect is it took a lot of time up front. So all the resources had to be prepared, and all the problems had to be prepared. And every single day after class, we would get together as a group and say, okay, did they get here? Where do we need to get them to? What kind of coaching do we need to give them? How do we need to lead them to this information, because they're not where we think they need to be? And so it took a lot of time. Now, I think there's a lot of potential there to improve learning, to have solid learning, but it was a lot of time invested. And so that's one of the drawbacks. I think someone else mentioned that, it was Andre or someone else mentioned it in the discussion last week. It can be a great tool, but it is not the easiest approach in the world. So those are some of my ideas about constructivism, but I think this may not be as tough just because it builds so seamlessly from the content of last week. So we will see you in the discussion forums and go from there, and I look forward to seeing what you think.